Slovakia. On Christmas Day, all the Estonians gathered in a hall with a piano. Even the men were back from the forest, and everyone was singing. Estonians have always sung, and they have always sung nationalistic, nostalgic songs, and now they sang them all. I hid myself under the piano and cried, and I still cry when I hear some of those songs. After Christmas, we started to realize that the far-off sounds of artillery were getting louder. Every morning, upon waking, we would listen. Louder than yesterday? By the end of January 1945, the artillery thunder was terrifyingly close. The forces were gathered together. The men were recalled from the forests. It was time for the families to depart, to get over the border into Germany. There would be a train at midnight, which would take us to Birnbaum. In 2 days' time, a train from Birnbaum would take the women and children over the border. 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning, that train was not coming, but the Soviets were. In desperation, the refugee men collected whatever money and jewelry they could from their wives and bribed Polish farmers into getting out their horses and farm carts and taking us on our journey. It was a very cold Polish winter. The snow was deep and the carts were open-sided. We were wrapped in our coats and blankets, mittens and knitted hats, and we were terrified. The men were told to stay behind. They would find us, they told us, but neither side knew if we would ever see each other again. The train of carts took off, a line of black ants crossing the huge white plains between forests, and became the victim of occasional strafing by passing Soviet planes. The cold was such that people died just through the act of exposing their bottoms for defecating. So we reached Birnbaum in time, but not all of the people did. And we were packed into a cattle train. We were packed so tightly that at one point I lifted up my feet and thought I could get some sleep that way. But although I couldn't fall, being jolted between swaying bodies was most unpleasant. My sister and I never knew where the train took us, but probably to the neighborhood of Frankfurt. There we were placed in a farmhouse and Milvi fell ill. When I was ill in Estonia, Uncle Bart had given me a cardboard angel holding a candle. We used that candle in the night to watch over Milvi. Our mother was never good at languages. With Milvi ill, she now had to rely on me. Off we went in the morning to barter something for some aspirins, following the railway tracks to the village. In the distance, we saw a shabby man stumbling along, head bowed. Mother said something like, "Dirty old drunkard," and clutched me to her. The man was almost upon us when he looked up and shouted in disbelief. It was Father. A few hours after the carts had left Obersitsko, the refugee men were told to throw away their weapons and go save themselves. If he was to save himself, Father certainly wasn't going to throw away his revolver. He tracked us to Birnbaum, found where the train had been taking us, and followed. By the time he found us, though, he'd been searching for some days and he had lost all hope. This was the day he was going to blow his brains out. Now that the family was together, a plan was formed. One of Mother's school friends had married before the war and moved to Flensburg, near the Danish border. Mother had a postcard from her with her address. We would make our way to Flensburg. Some trains were still running. I remember that we passed Berlin while it was still burning from being bombed. There was also a lot of time spent waiting at railway stations with others who were also desperate to move west, hoping against hope that there would be another train. At night, we would slip into a potato field and dig up some potatoes, cook them in the embers of a fire. Potatoes were the only foodstuff available. And officials, every now and then, a bunch of officious officials would demand to see our papers and try to find somewhere to send us. "We have just the place for you, ideal," this group told us. And then when the labor camp gates clanged shut behind us, we knew what sort of place we were in. We had to remove all our clothing and walk down a corridor of showers which spat disinfectant at us. Even our belongings were fumigated. Then we were allocated rooms and the adults and Milvi were given work schedules. They were putting all wanderers, I guess, refugees, or people who didn't have anywhere to go in these camps just to get them out of their hair. However, we were due a stroke of really good luck. The assistant to the commandant of the camp was an Estonian. She couldn't get out herself, but she was determined to save as many Estonians as she could. She took Mother's postcard from her friend, told the commandant that it stated we were expected in Flensburg, where jobs and accommodation were awaiting us. The commandant was happy to have one less problem to deal with. We were let out. The next time we saw any officious-looking people, we hid. On the way to Flensburg, we met up with another Estonian family who decided to tag along. We didn't really want to land them on Mother's friend, but they ignored our protests. I don't know how we contacted Mother's friend, but she and her husband welcomed us and found us a place to live, the offices of a yacht club on the opposite side of the harbor. The yacht club was closed because of the war. Nearby were grain warehouses where the adults in Milvi found work, and they would come home with their pockets full of grain, which we would toast on top of our primer stove. The toasted grains would be hard, but would taste wonderful to an empty stomach. We could also get dried peas, which Mother would cook, but I couldn't wait for them to be cooked. I would eat handfuls of them as they were. In Bermuda, quite a few years later, the dentist Peter Outerbridge observed, "I've never seen teeth as flat as yours." The yacht club was near the railway station, with a coal yard across the rails. During the day, I would walk along the railway tracks, picking up any pieces of coal which had fallen off for our little stove. And at night, I would be eased through a hole in the coal yard fence, passing handfuls back to the others. I became an all-round scavenger. I haunted the waste paper baskets outside offices for sheets of paper, especially colored copy paper that I could write or draw on. I collected cigarette butts from the street so that the men could get some scraps of tobacco and make their own cigarettes. German cigarettes, paperosid we used to call them, had long empty cardboard tubes as filters, so the smoker could smoke it right down, not good for spare tobacco. I scavenged stuff which would float in from the sea, an occasional pencil, a piece of fabric, an inner tube. I combed the hillsides in the unrewarded hope of finding a silk parachute which could be made into a pretty dress. Very occasionally, I would find pieces of tinfoil fallen from packages dropped through radar. The Yalta Conference took place, and we waited with bated breath for Britain and America to tell Stalin he had to get his forces out of our country. Churchill tried, but Roosevelt sold us out. No Estonian will ever forgive him. Children make do wherever they are. For me, life was a new normal. Then Hitler died and the offices closed. No paper in the wastebaskets. The British arrived. It was announced the war had ended. We knew nothing of the war being fought in the Pacific. Our war was over and we were in British hands, not Russian ones. We'd always liked the British. We just thought they were really misguided and naive to join up with the Soviets. British and American soldiers thronged the streets. The Americans especially seemed so tall and handsome and always showed their teeth. We weren't used to people who smiled. We'd never had anything to smile about. But these men did more than that. They grinned. We had to learn a new word. We also learned our first sentence of English. "Please give me chocolate." And then you turn and run. I ate my first ice cream. The soldiers gave us white bread. White bread was special to us, a Sunday treat. It goes by another name in Estonian, sai. Everyday bread is dark and called leib. On the day the British troops paraded across the harbour in honour of their king's official birthday, somebody dropped a bomb in a nearby warehouse. We awoke to what seemed the restart of World War II. Our windows were shattered, one wall of the yacht club was blown away, and shrapnel nearly killed the father of the other family. In our night clothes, wrapped in blankets, we rushed out of the house to find everyone else in our area in the same state. Officials, worrying that something else might yet blow up, got us marching across the harbour to the main part of the town. So the British soldiers found themselves parading in front of a large group of mainly shoeless people wrapped in blankets. I was 6 years old and I didn't have any underpants on. This was the most embarrassing moment of my life. After the useless Potsdam conference, we received word that the United Nations Relief and Rehabilitation Administration, UNRWA, was setting up displaced persons camps, and we registered. In September, a year after leaving Estonia, we arrived in Meerbeek, a town taken from the Germans as punishment for killing a captured British airman. We were placed in house number 93, which had 10 rooms and therefore housed 10 families, and our room was behind there. The UNRWA and international missions supplied us with clothing, foodstuffs, medicine, and other necessities. Food rations for DPs in the autumn of 1945 amounted to 2,300 calories per day per person. In 1946, they changed according to age groups. There was a shortage of wheat and rye, and we would receive bread made of sweet corn, corn on the cob, which was dry and tasted stale. Even I couldn't eat much of that. Potatoes would reach us as dried cubes, which had to be reconstituted. Memorably, I vomited them up all over the school lunch table. Now, these are some of the people who lived in our house there. That's me, that's my mother. The next two, there were Estonians, Latvians, and Lithuanians, and Poles in Meerbeek. Altogether, there were over 850,000 persons in DP camps, with 31,000 of them being Estonians. The next 2 years were very productive. Estonians established their own schools. Here we are, brownies, there I am. There's my sister as a guide, girl guide. Schools, choirs, churches, orchestras, scout and guide groups, folk dancing troupes, sports teams and activities, workshops for producing items for sale like leatherwork and jewelry boxes, and published their own newspapers. This was a wallet my father made, and he used it all his life. I still have it, and I use it when I'm traveling. I put all my receipts in it. I loved school, which was from 8 until 1. Here's one of my reports. 5 is excellent, 4 is good, and so on. During which time we were served lunch. 12 to 1 was lunch. Then we went home and did 3 hours of homework. Now I'm talking as a 7-year-old, that's what we had, and helped with the gardening. Each house had a garden and orchard. The land was apportioned to all the inhabitants, and the fruit weighed and shared between all. That's if we children had not eaten it when it was unripe. We grew tobacco, and I kept rabbits to supplement our diet. The tobacco was very rough. The teenagers were sent to boarding school in Stolzenau and came back only at weekends, and here's my sister's confirmation. I'm like that because I was bad-tempered that day anyway. My mother's just smacked me. My cough had been getting progressively worse. Mother would unravel old sweaters and use the rough wool to knit me vests and stockings. Horribly itchy stuff, which I hated but was forced to wear. Finally, one of the doctors tired of Mother's complaints and ordered an X-ray. Then things moved fast. I had 2 spots in my lungs, tuberculosis. I was whisked off to a sanatorium somewhere in the countryside. I remember lots of greenery and the German Schloss or castle in the distance. Nothing else, although I was there half a school year. So we continued until 1947, when it became clear that these 800,000 or 850,000 European displaced persons in Germany must be given a chance to restart their lives. In the British zone, we felt reasonably safe, but then we were offered 5 countries in which we could settle: America, Canada, Australia, Sweden, or England. These were countries which needed workers, especially workers willing to fill the most menial jobs. The quotas for America and Canada were soon filled, leaving us with a choice of 3. At the time, it was possible that Russia might restart the war, so Sweden was too close. It was also possible that Estonia would be free, so Australia was too far. That left us England, and in May 1947, the men and single women were sent on ahead to learn the language and establish themselves in mills and factories and farms. The rest will follow the next year, and this is from an English magazine. These are the people in our camp singing. Back at the camp, we would wait with great excitement for parcels from father. New red sandals for me with crepe soles, oranges. He was working in a farm and would send us his ration of oranges, which were kept tantalizingly on top of the wardrobe until Christmas. In January 1948 came our turn to go through the immigration process. All adults were questioned, as father must have been, about our political views and our reasons for leaving our homelands. We were then sent to the first transit camp, Pockenhagen, in Lower Saxony, where we lived in barracks, and where I met for the first time a woman who had actually survived the Moro tragedy. We queued up each day for meals, and mother would take most of my bread away to give to men who would chop wood for our stove. They had to go at night into woods, which were forbidden to us to do this. And I never was sure whether he was after my sister or my mother. But you can tell by the look in his eye that he certainly was. Other people came and passed on to the next transit camp, but we stayed for 3 months, terrified that the authorities knew about my TB and were never going to allow us to go. Then finally, we were sent to the second camp where we were tested for TB. I had pink cheeks and a healthy face, and that was it. The doctor would pinch my cheek, smiling, and say, "Easy to see, there's nothing wrong with this one." He didn't check me for test results, and in May 1948, we arrived in England safe at last. We were placed in a camp in West Wales, Wiltshire, and father came to see us. By the end of summer, he'd found work for both my parents and Milby at Westonbirt School in Gloucestershire. But all that follows is another story. Just one final note. From England, father wrote to Uncle Bart. It took a while, but he received a reply. The town where Uncle Bart lived had been bombed to rubble, but his family was safe, and so was he. It made us feel better, but father never wrote again. And as I said, there are so many other stories. The story of those who stayed, the story of those who were deported, and each single one, although it shares something in common with the others, is yet totally different in detail. And I put the bibliography up. I did do some research for this, and gosh, I've taken a lot of your time.